Marco Codes! What I've often seen throughout my programming career is that people never really take the time to fully learn / understand a given topic. And I've heard very funky sentences over the years, like for example, Hibernate, which is a library in Java to save stuff to a database, is randomly doing whatever it wants and no one can possibly understand it. Or Gradle, which is a build tool, doesn't work well together with Git. And I was always like, what? Now, the question is, how do you actually learn about a given, framework or programming language or even a service, like, a given AWS service, and there's like 50,000 of these out there. I can give you my personal way, which has served me well over the last, 10, 15 years, and maybe it helps you as well. To start off, apart from doing the most basic, 5-minute good case tutorials, I'm personally not a fan of most, blogs, online tutorials, videos, and whatever have you. In fact, I do prefer books. The reason being, for books, someone had to commit for a long period of time to come up with something sensible, not just, 1 or 2 days or maybe even 2 weeks. All right, so books, how does that work? Well, in the tech world, you have a couple of, big, well-known publishers. For example, you have O'Reilly, you have Manning, you have Pragmatic Bookshelf, you have No Starch Press, there's plenty of others, Addison Wesley, whatever have you. And in general, I would focus on these publishers first. What that actually means is, or what I did in the past is, from time to time, always having a look at their website, finding out, hey, what are your current bestsellers? What has recently been published? And just going through the list and finding out, what's new? What could I actually learn about? Doing the same thing for Pragmatic Bookshelf and so on and so forth. If you have the money, because it's a bit pricey, or your employer pays for it, there's also O'Reilly's Learning Center, which was called Safari Books Online. And I think they renamed it some time ago. Here you have an insanely big selection of essentially all available tech books, courses, live events, whatever have you. So you can essentially just browse through every publisher online that there is with one tiny text box. Now, last but not least, if you do know an author because they wrote sensational blog posts and then they, publish a book, I would always go directly to the author and just buy the book from them, obviously. So if you follow someone already, then go with that. Otherwise, Safari Books Online is a good starting point. Other than that, you can always start with the individual publishers. Now, let's keep this video very pragmatic and assume I'm a backend developer. I know nothing about React and I want to learn something about React. How would I approach that? Well, let's start by just putting React into this tiny box here. It takes a couple of seconds. And then, as I said, usually no courses, no videos, no live events for me. I'll just go with books straight away. And then you can still see, well, there's 26,000 search results for React. It doesn't actually mean that there have been 26,000 books written about React, but that React, pops up in all of these books, at least a couple of words. And as React is also, a very common word, it could be totally unrelated. But still, if you go through this list, you'll see Fluent React, React Key Concepts, TypeScript, Learning React, Just React. And I think it continues for a couple of pages so that you'll have dozens of books at least where you can learn about React, TypeScript, whatever have you. Now, my approach is, let me just quickly go back to the first page. I'll always start with the publisher. So O'Reilly, yes, that book is could potentially be something. Packed. The quality has been subpar in the past, so even though it has good reviews, I would always put it on the back burner. Might be, my prejudice, but that is just what I learned in the past. Then we've got Learning React. Okay, O'Reilly. Apress is somewhat on the edge, for example. O'Reilly is good. Big Nerd Wrench guides I'm unsure about. Manning, I know Manning, so yeah, that could potentially be included. Then obviously the titles. Fluent React looks a bit too advanced. React Key Concepts, okay, yeah, but packed. Learning React looks good, so I'll just, open it up. Just React, Apress, I'll skip it. Application architecture, too advanced. Programming hooks in action, too advanced. Too general, stuff like that. Let's see, second page, up and running, I'll open it up. And then, I might continue for a couple of pages and just, see title-wise what might be interesting. Last note is, so publisher title gives me a good picture. The publication date. The thing is, in the JavaScript universe, for example, things change quickly. So yeah, stuff might get outdated. But usually I don't have an issue with, reading books which are 2, 3, 4 years old. And most often, for the big bestsellers, there are anyway new editions. There's great books, for example, in Java, Concurrency in Practice, which I think is almost 20 years old. So age is, with experience, you'll find out that age of the book doesn't really matter as much. So relatively recent, couple of years, but the big bestsellers could be 10, 15 years, doesn't matter. They could still be quite good. All right, so we found multiple books, just 2 in this case, I want to focus on. And now you might be thinking, hey, that's multiple books even. Shouldn't I just find one book? It will take some time to find out, hey, is that the right book? But you'll have to start reading, which means you potentially can waste time with multiple books. But it's just part of the learning journey. Now, the question is, what do we do with these 2 books? And that brings me to one of my favorite topics, actually. Just imagine I had Learning React as a physical book, right behind me. And with physical books, there's a couple of stages, a book can go through. So imagine you buy a book and you put it on your desk. The first stage is simply the fact that you bought a book conveys to you somehow that you now know the topic. You don't even have to read it anymore. And I guess that's the case with a lot of business books or self-help books or whatever. You just buy it, put it somewhere, and then it just stands there and you never work through it and that's it. Second stage is you take some time to open up the book and then you just skim through the chapters, right? So it's kind of like you go through the first chapter and you think, yeah, okay, now I kind of know what's happening, and you take it on the subway, for example. And then people around you think, that might be a smart dude. But you just, skim read it because anyway, you don't have time, you need to program. And then after, a bit of skim reading, you just put the book aside. And again, it's on your desk and it just lays there and you think you know the topic. Third stage, you read the book from, beginning till end for now to make it simple. But you don't just read through it, because there's no way just by, a single read through, you'll understand the concepts, you'll understand all the, the code and whatever. But you actually drill yourself through the book, meaning you open up your editor, you try to, for example, not just copy and paste the code and see everything is green, but you try to write out the code multiple times. So you go through a chapter, any given chapter, once, twice, 3 times or whatever. And, make sure you really drill the stuff and really drill the concepts and drill the code so you really understand what's going on. And now let's take React, for example. There's no way I'll just read through, React state management chapter once and then have, a fully solid understanding. I need to reread this chapter a couple of times. I need to rework the code example a couple of times and, introduce errors maybe, make sure it works again, rearrange the given code example a bit in my own way to really fully understand the given topic. And it goes even further. Drilling or reworking essentially means practicing. So you should take the code, all the React concepts you've just learned, and apply them to, for example, a pet project you have lying around to make everything as real world as possible. In short, don't just read, but practice, practice, practice. Which brings us to the next topic. How much of any of these given books should I actually, drill through? Now with Learning React, for example, and I guess the same thing with React Up and Running, because they are on the shorter side, what happens is that you would probably, work through the complete book, would have to work through a complete book. If you have other topics, like for example, let's search for Kubernetes, right? And then you'll see that you have a lot of these reference material books where you have 680 pages, 750 pages, whatever. Then a rule of thumb, which is very oversimplified, but it kind of worked for me, is that the first third of the book gives you a really good understanding of most topics that you'll pass job interviews and at least as much as all your colleagues. If you work through the second third of the book, you'll know more than anyone else inside your company, and people will actually come to you and ask you all the time questions about any given topic. The last third of these huge books is usually stuff that you never care about, at least not, during the learning stage, and it might be useful in some production circumstances. A super simplified, over-the-top rule of thumb, but shorter books, work your way through them. Bigger books, 1/3, 2/3, maybe somewhere in that range, but drilling through these, thirds. Let me give you another example. For example, what you want to do is you want to get a job at FANG, and then you start out with, hey, I suddenly need to understand algorithms and data structures again. What happened to me is I actually, physically bought a couple of these books. So you have learning algorithms, grokking algorithms, advanced algorithms, a couple of books like this one here, which Steve Yaggi recommended, 10, 15 years ago in one of his blog posts. What I personally found is that most of these books are not my style. That is saying it nicely. In terms, a lot of them, for example, this one here, 1,000 pages, is essentially written by academics. And they usually sound smart. You have to do a ton of mapping yourself. They're not written to teach you the stuff in the most direct way. And often you kind of feel, you are the problem. But at some point I noticed, no, the authors are the problem. And for me, it's too mathematical and too abstract and too whatever. And I just wanted to get on with it and, find a very direct way to brush up on my skills. So what I did is I did the hard work, working through a couple of these books. I also worked partially through the algorithms book. And then I came to A Common Sense Guide to Data Structures and Algorithms by Jay Wengrove, which is a fantastic book. And even if you think you're a dummy or whatever, it is so simple, maybe written too simple for a couple of people. You'll really understand data structures, algorithms, whatever have you. Much easier to digest than anything else I've seen on that topic. But again, there's plenty of books, plenty of algorithm books, and you need to do the hard work and to find out which one might be the perfect book for you. And by the way, while we're at it, same thing for compilers. Everything that was written in Hacker News, for example, I was like, what the hell is going on? These books, essentially. And then I found a book. I asked a game programmer online on Twitter, Jonathan Blow, about, do you know any book, any compiler book that's good? And then he recommended me this one here, Crafting Interpreters, which is an insanely good book. And now, by the way, Crafting Interpreters is basically a book split in two. The first half, you build an interpreter. The second half, you build a virtual machine in C. I drilled myself through the first half of the book. The second half of the book, I only skim read. So while I might, seem smart having this book lying here on my desk, it's actually only the first part of the book that I really felt comfortable with, just so you know. Okay, so now let's add a couple of practical issues on top. If, for example, you want to get up to speed with Java, at some point you'll probably, meet Hibernate, a persistence library I talked about earlier. And as you can see, there's a couple of books like 600 pages, whatever have you, 600 pages. The same thing for Gradle. I think the build tool I mentioned at the beginning. Okay, you have Gradle in Action, almost 500 pages and blah, blah, blah. So in fact, all of these, libraries, plus 500 pages, plus 500 pages, plus 2,000 pages. Who reads all these pages? Who works through all these pages? Almost no one. There are practical issues. What you could do is, if you have the discipline, do consistent reading on a daily basis. 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Might not sound a lot, but if you do it consistently over a long period of time, you will learn an insane amount. I can tell because in the past I did that a lot. Now I have been, especially with kids, I haven't been reading as much or almost not at all. And I can definitely tell. So with kids, the question is also practically, do you come back home at night and your wife took care of your 2 or 3 kids or whatever have you, and then you just tell her, hey, I'm just going to zone out now and I'm going to read The Well-Grounded Java Developer on the couch for another hour. It's not going to work. So that is, practically the real issue. How can you consistently find time, 30 minutes a day, to read up on these topics? Because employers also usually don't like it if you just say, hey, I'm not programming today. I'm just going to, work my way through this book here now for the next 3 hours. The funny thing is, which I think no one understands is, if you just did that work up front, if you just read the effing manual, all these, issues, bugs, time-consuming stuff on a day-to-day basis where you don't know what you're doing, they wouldn't happen and you would save a lot of time in the long run. But hey, that's the way it is. All right, so at the beginning I mentioned, usually I prefer books. There's also the odd exception. For example, Casey Muratori, also a programmer, which I dearly recommend anyone to read up on, has a performance and web programming course, which is essentially video-based. There's also transcripts. But I love his videos. I love all the stuff that he teaches. And this is one of the notable exceptions where I think, hey, the course is perfect because I haven't seen any of the stuff the way he teaches it somewhere else. So that's why I will watch the videos. Same here again. I think you need, at least a couple of weeks, months to fully work through the course. Have I been consistent enough with his lessons? No, I haven't been. The consistency is always the problem with all these, learning topics. And that brings us to somewhat of a boring interim summary. Because did I just tell you a secret with the books, Safari Books Online, whatever? Not really. The thing is, the consistency, the boring work of reading through all these books or videos might be in your case or something else, whatever way you learn. Doing it on a consistent basis and not just, skim reading stuff or skipping over it and blah, blah, blah. It takes a lot of time. And you won't be able to be a perfect programmer in the next 48 hours or 96 hours, like some YouTube tutorials claim or some books even claim. Instead, it will take you months. So that is your expectation, months, years even, to fully grasp these topics. And that is unfortunately also part of the truth. There is no shortcut. There is no, you can learn all this stuff in just 2 days, unless at some point someone invents a USB stick you can plug into your brain directly. To finish off, and I've partially covered that question already, how do you know that you really understand a given topic? And let me give you a tiny anecdote. Because I've just my wife rather had 2 kids. When you go into labor the very first time, when birth is about to start, then before that happens, the question is always like, well, how do I know these are real contractions now? How do I know I need to go to the hospital or I can, still wait it out a tiny bit? And the answer is always, well, you won't have that question when it starts, which is an interesting answer, but it was true in our case. And it's the same kind of with these learning topics. When you work yourself, when you drill yourself through 4, 5, 6, 7 chapters of a given topic, and you suddenly have a really good understanding of a given topic, you won't ask yourself anymore, hey, do I really understand the topic? You will just intrinsically know. And the real challenge is having done this process a couple of times so you can actually trust it and that you trust this implicit, yes, I will understand it if I just work through this book or these 2 or 3 books. All right, so that's it. That was my process. I hope it helps. And please let me know in the comments down below what your own learning process is, what do you think of this. And until then, see you next time. Sayonara.